Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum dear students. I hope you all are fine and in the best conditions of your health. So in today's lecture, for the course of medicinal chemistry, we shall discuss about theories of the drug receptor interactions. Right? So the basic concepts which we shall discuss in this topic will be, we shall see about what are drugs and ligands, what are different types of ligands. We shall see about antagonist and agonist, and different theories of drug receptor interactions. Firstly, what is a drug? So drug is any substance, which may be natural or synthetic, which has some physiological effect on the body when it is administered into your body, right? So whenever you take a substance and that substance that you have taken has some biological effect on your body, then the substance will be considered as a drug. But remember that food is not considered as a drug, right? So anything other than food, if it affects your body, whether positive or negative, so that will be considered as a drug. The next thing is a ligand. So any molecule that is able to bind with a receptor molecule, right? So any molecule that is able to bind with a receptor molecule is called a ligand. So a ligand can be a biomolecule, for example a neurotransmitter, etc., or it can be a drug as well, right? So the basic condition for a ligand is that any molecule that is able to bind with a receptor. Then what's a receptor? So receptor or the receptor site is a specific binding site that is present on the cell surface. And the receptor is made up of proteins, or it can be made up of nucleic acid, right? And this receptor is the site where ligand can bind and characterize and initiate a characteristic biological response, right? So receptor is a site, receptor is a molecule that has some area on which your ligand will be able to bind, right? So we saw that ligands are the substances that are able to bind with a receptor, right? So when a ligand binds with a receptor, it produces some response, right? So depending on the effect that is produced by the receptor when a ligand is bound to it, the ligands are classified into two categories: agonist and antagonist. So if a ligand bonds with a receptor, completely bonds with a receptor, and produces some biological response, alright? If a ligand bonds with a receptor and produces some biological response, such a ligand is called agonist. While if a ligand binds with a receptor and blocks the receptor, right? Since it's blocking the receptor, so as a result, no biological response is produced. So any ligand that blocks the receptor is called antagonist. And antagonists do not produce any biological response, right? So a ligand that produces some biological response is called an agonist, while the ligand that does not produce any biological response is considered as an antagonist. So now we have type of agonist. We have three types of agonist: full agonist, partial agonist, and inverse agonist. So what's a full agonist? If a ligand binds with a receptor and produces maximum effect, right? So whenever ligand binds with a receptor, as a result the receptor gives you maximum response, then such a ligand is called full agonist because it's producing a full response from the receptor, right? So such ligands increase the activity of the receptor. They increase the activity of the receptor to the maximum extent. As a result, the receptor will give their maximum response, right? Such a ligand is called full agonist. While if a ligand partially increases the activity of response of the receptor, right? So when a ligand binds with a receptor and receptor gives partial response, it's not giving you full response, then in such case we say that agonist is a partial agonist, right? Because the receptor is giving you partial response. It doesn't matter how much amount of the agonist you increase, the receptor will never give you full response, right? So this is characteristic of a partial agonist because it's binding partially to the receptor, so the receptor is not getting fully active. As a result, the receptor is giving you partial response. So it doesn't matter whether you increase the concentration of agonist or not, you're not going to get the full response, right? So this is partial agonist. The third category of the agonist is the inverse agonist. What's inverse agonist? Inverse agonists are the ligands which bind with the receptor and decrease the activity of the receptor, right? So Full agonist and partial agonist, what are that? They were increasing the activity of the receptor, while the inverse agonist decreased the activity of the receptor. So this is the three types of different type of agonist: full agonist, partial agonist, and inverse agonist. Now we have antagonist. You know what are antagonists? Antagonists are substances that block the receptor and they do not produce any biological response. Right? So antagonist is any substance that does not provide any biological response. So the antagonists are blockers, and they are of two types: reversible antagonist and irreversible antagonist. So before going towards understanding that what's a reversible antagonist or what is an irreversible antagonist, it's important for you to know about the orthosteric site and allosteric site. The orthosteric site is the site or the place where the ligand normally binds. Normally we call orthosteric site as active site. Right? Whenever you are saying active site is actually the orthosteric site. It's the place where the ligand should bind, while all other sites other than the active sites are called allosteric site. Right? The ligand binds at the orthosteric site, while the other site other than the orthosteric sites are called the allosteric sites. So let's go towards the types of reversible antagonist. Right? So reversible antagonist, since the name suggests, they are reversible, means they don't permanently bind with the receptor. Right? So they will bind with the receptor for some time and then they will be removed. So the reversible antagonists are of two types: competitive antagonist and non-competitive antagonist. Right? So if a reversible antagonist competes with the agonist for an active site, right? So if your antagonist is competing with the agonist for the receptor site or for the orthosteric site, such type of antagonist is called competitive antagonist. For this example, let's consider this figure first. So here we are having, so this orange color box, this is suppose an agonist, and this blue color is an antagonist, right? That's a blocker and this is your agonist that's going to activate the receptor. So both have to bind with the same site, right? So they are competing with each other. So who wins? That will depend on number one factor, which has greater affinity for this site. So if this blocker has a greater affinity, it will bind first, but if the agonist has greater affinity, it will bind first. The second parameter which will determine that which of these will bind first will be the concentration. So if your blocker is in greater concentration, that will bind first, and if your agonist is in greater concentration, that will bind first. Right? So you can see here why we are saying it as competitive antagonist, because both of these are binding for the same site. They are competing for the same site. Right? There's a competition, there's sort of competition between your agonist and antagonist. Both want to bind on the same site, but which one wins, that will depend on the affinity of these two for the receptor site, and number two, that will depend on the concentration. Right? So once your agonist gets bound to the receptor site, right? So let's consider a situation that your antagonist wins, it gets bind to the receptor site. You can remove that antagonist simply by increasing the concentration of the agonist, right? Because the antagonist is binding reversibly. So if you increase the concentration of the agonist can displace that antagonist as well. The second type of the reversible antagonist is non-competitive antagonist, right? So non-competitive antagonist binds at some other site than allosteric sites. So sites other than allosteric site are called, orthosteric sites are called allosteric site. Right? You can see that if your antagonist is trying to bind with the active site or the orthosteric site, and if your antagonist is binding to the allosteric site, right? So if your blocker is binding at some allosteric site, then in that case there is no competition between the antagonist and the agonist. So this is called non-competitive antagonist. Let's consider this from this example. So here you can see this is your agonist. This wants to bind on this receptor site. So this is your active site, and this is your antagonist. So the antagonist has bonded on this site. Right? What happens that since it is bonded on this site, the antagonist, after bonding to the allosteric site, it causes some change in the active site. Since it has changed the active site, as a result, the agonist is unable to bind with the site. Right? So your antagonist has changed the shape of receptor site. As a result, your agonist is unable to bind with the active site. So this is the example of non-competitive antagonist, in which the antagonist is bonding at a place which is other than some active site. As a result of binding with the allosteric site, the antagonist causes a change in the shape of your active site. As a result, the agonist is unable to bind with the active site. Right? So this is example of non-competitive antagonist. Now we have irreversible antagonist. As the name suggests, such antagonist, if it gets bonded with the receptor, the bonding will be permanent. It will not be gone whatever you do. Right? So if the antagonist bonds permanently with the receptor protein, then this is a case of irreversible antagonist. Right? So irreversible antagonist form covalent bond with the receptor protein. So as a result, when the antagonist forms the covalent bond with the receptor protein, the agonist can never bind with the receptor. Right? So these irreversible antagonists can be competitive or they can be not competitive. So when they compete with the receptor, when they compete with the agonist, it means they are trying to bind with the same active site to which the agonist should bind. And when they are not competitive, then means that the agonist is going to bind at some other place, as it's going to bind at some allosteric site, while the agonist will bond with the active site, right? So first what happens, the antagonist gets permanently bonded to the allosteric site. As a result of binding with the allosteric site, the antagonist will change the shape of the active site. As a result, your agonist will not be able to bind with the active site, right? So this is example of irreversible antagonist. Right. So here we have again the drug receptor interaction. You know that drug must bind with the receptor in order to produce a biological response, right? Secondly, we also studied in the previous lecture that whenever the drug binds with the receptor must show some change. The receptor must experience some change. So if the receptor is not experiencing any change, in that case no biological effect will be produced, right? So it's very, very compulsory for the drug to bind with the receptor, and it's very, very compulsory that the receptor must show some change in order to show some effect. So you know that if D is the drug and R is the receptor, so this interaction is a reversible interaction, right? So the drug plus receptor form drug receptor complex, and the biological effect is shown by this complex. But once this complex dissociates, biological effect is lost, right? So biological effect will only appear when this complex is formed, and once this complex is dissociated, the biological response is lost as well. We also saw that the stability of the drug receptor complex is indicated by the factor of Kd. This is a dissociation constant, right? And we also said that for an ideal drug, if a drug is said to be has some more affinity and efficacy, then the Kd for a drug should be low. So if a Kd is low, it means that drug receptor complex is formed in larger amount, right? So for an ideal drug, the Kd value should be lower. We can also show this reversible reaction in the form of drug plus receptor that's reversibly being converted into drug receptor complex. So this forward reaction is indicated by the rate constant known as K on. Why we are saying is K on? Because in the forward direction, when this drug receptor complex is formed, the biological response is on, mean that this complex will show some biological response. But in the reverse reaction, when this drug receptor complex dissociates to form drug plus receptor, the biological response will be diminished, that will be finished. So that's why we are saying is this rate of reaction as K off, right? So K on is indicating formation of drug receptor complex. It means that that's indicating that the biological response will be observed, while the K off is indicating the breakdown of this complex. As a result, the biological response will be lost, right? So the biological activity of a drug is related to its affinity for the receptor. So if the drug receptor complex is more stable, then in that case it will not dissociate and it will show biological response to a greater extent, right? The stability is measured by the Kv. So as I have already mentioned, for an ideal drug, it is important that the stability of the drug should be greater and the stability of the drug receptor complex should be stable, right? If your drug receptor complex is more stable, that will be formed in larger amount. As a result, the Kd value should decrease, right? For an ideal drug, the Kd value should be lower, should be less, right? So in the previous lectures, we saw that the drug receptor interactions involve ionic interactions, they involve ion dipole, dipole-dipole, hydrogen bonding interactions, hydrophobic interactions, one-to-one interactions, covalent bonding, etc. Right? So now in this lecture, we shall see about the different theories that have been proposed for the drug receptor interactions. Right? The first theory is lock and key model, then we have occupation theory, then we have rate theory, we have induced fit theory, then we have macromolecular perturbation theory, activation aggregation, and the last one is two-state model of receptor activation. So we shall briefly describe each of these theories one by one. Firstly, the lock-key theory. The lock and key model, it explains basically the mechanism of enzymatic reactions. Right? So this mechanism, this method or this model was proposed to explain the enzymatic reactions. So what happens is that in the enzymatic reactions, the enzyme and your ligand bind. So here the substrate is your ligand, right? So this enzyme and substrate combine to form a complex which is called the enzyme substrate complex, right? So the substrate should bind on the active site of the enzyme, right? So also we say the active site as the binding site or the orthosteric site, right? The substrate should bind with the binding site on the enzyme, right? And the binding site of the enzyme should be complementary to the substrate, means the functional group on the substrate and the functional group on the enzymes should be complementary, they should be compatible, right? So once this binding occurs, what happens that the substrate will become activated, as a result the reaction will occur, and by the end the enzyme and substrate will get separated and the substrate would have converted into product. But the important thing in this reaction is that we say that the substrate and the binding site of the enzyme should be complementary, right? This is the main theme of lock and key model. Let's elaborate this with an example. Consider that this lock is an enzyme and this whole of this enzyme is the binding site of enzyme, and this is your substrate, which is key, right? So in order for the substrate to bind with the active site of this enzyme, the shape of this substrate should be compatible to the lock hole of this lock, the keyhole of this lock, right? So if these are complementary, if they are compatible, only then the key can enter into the active site. Otherwise, the lock will not be open, right? So if you want to open the lock, the key must fit into the hole. Means the shape of the key and the shape of the loop should be compatible, right? The same way is that this is enzyme, this is active site of the enzyme, right? So if you want this reaction to occur, the substrate must exactly have the same shape as the active site of the enzyme, right? But if there is incompatibility in the shape of the substrate will not be able to bind with the enzyme, right? And once it fits into the enzyme, so the reaction will occur because the enzyme substrate complex is formed, right? So this is basic key theme of the lock and key model, that the substrate must have exactly the same shape as that of the hole of the lock. And if the structures of the lock, if the structure of your binding site and the structure of your substrate are not compatible, they are not complementary, then the substrate will not be able to bind with the receptor, right? So this is the basic theme of lock and key model. The next theory we have is the occupation theory. According to occupation theory, drug firstly binds with the active site of the receptor and then activate the receptor, and once the receptor becomes activated, we get some biological response, and the biological response is produced that is proportional to the amount of drug receptor complex formed. So if your drug receptor complex is formed in larger concentration, biological response also will be larger, and if your drug receptor complex is formed in lesser amount, then biological response will also be lesser, right? Also, according to occupation theory, when your drug receptor complex dissociates, the biological response is lost, right? The biological response will only exist until your drug receptor complex is formed. So once the receptor is gone, once this complex is gone, the biological activity is lost. And the intensity of this biological effect produced is directly proportional to the number of receptors occupied. So if maximum number of receptors are occupied, then in that case response will be maximum. However, if the number of receptors occupied is lesser, then in that case the biological response will be lesser. Let's consider this. Let's explain this with an example. So here we have receptor. We consider that the drug can bind on 4 sides of this receptor. So if only one drug binds, we'll get only 25% effect. If 2 drugs bind to the receptor sites, then we'll get 50% effect. If 3 drug molecules bind with the receptor site, means if the 3 receptor sites are occupied with the drug, then we'll get 75% effect. And if all of the binding sites are occupied, then in that case we'll get 100% of the effect, right? So this is the basic theme of the occupation theory. As the number of drug molecules increase that has bonded with the receptor molecule, then the effect of the biological effect will be increased. The biological effect will be more pronounced when a greater amount of drug are bonded with a greater number of receptor sites. Next we have rate theory. According to rate theory, the biological response is directly proportional to the rate of formation of drug receptor complex. So if a drug receptor complex is formed at a faster rate, the biological response will be greater. But if the drug receptor complex is formed slowly, in that case the biological response will not be much more pronounced, right? So biological effect, according to rate theory, the biological response is not dependent on the concentration of drug receptor complex, but the biological response is only dependent on the rate of formation of the drug receptor complex, right? Also, the activation of the receptor is directly proportional to the number of encounters of drug with the receptor. How many times a drug gets bonded with the receptor, right? Again, the activation of the receptor is not depending on the concentration. It is depending on the number of times a drug molecule gets bonded with the receptor, right? So according to this rate theory, the duration of receptor occupation determines whether a molecule is agonist or partial agonist, right? So if a drug gets bonded with a receptor fastly, it will give you a huge response. So that will be an agonist. While if a drug binds slowly, that will give some partial response. So such agonist will be partial agonist, right? So this is rate theory. So according to this theory, what happens that the biological response is directly proportional to rate of formation of drug receptor complex. The next theory is induced fit theory. This is the most important theory and the most applicable theory of this time. According to this theory, the binding site of the receptor molecule are not fixed, right? They are not of definite shape, but instead they are very flexible, right? So what happens according to this theory, that when the ligand and receptor approach each other, then the binding site of the receptor molds itself so that the ligand can bind properly with the receptor, right? So this theory is a complementary theory to lock and key model. So according to lock and key model, the receptor site has a definite shape, and ligand of definite shape should be able to attach with the receptor site. But according to induced fit theory, the shape of the receptor site is not fixed. However, when ligand approaches the receptor site will change itself so that the ligand can bind with the receptor site, right? So this is called induced fit theory, right? So according to induced fit theory, any ligand that can induce some conformational change in the receptor, that's called an agonist. If a ligand is not able to induce some conformational change in the receptor, then no response will be produced. Such a ligand will be called antagonist. And if a ligand only partially produces some conformational change, right? If a ligand is only able to produce some slight change in the conformation, then we will get some slight response. In that case, such a ligand is called partial agonist, right? So according to induced fit theory, we can define the agonist as any ligand that can produce the conformational change. So whenever you get a conformational change, you get the biological response. That would be an agonist. Antagonist is unable to cause any change in the conformation. As a result, no biological response will be produced. Such a ligand will be called antagonist. While if a ligand only partially binds with the receptor, or if a ligand only causes some partial conformational change with the receptor, then we will get some partial response, and such a ligand will be considered as partial agonist. The next theory is macromolecular perturbation theory. Right. According to this theory, when a drug receptor interaction occurs, means when a drug is approaching a receptor, then there is some change in the conformation. So macromolecular perturbations mean change in conformation of the macromolecule. Right. So in the previous theory, we said that the ligand is able to change the conformation of the receptor, and the receptor also causes some change in the ligand. But according to macromolecular perturbation theory, whenever the drug is approaching a receptor molecule, only the conformation of the receptor will change. There will be no change in the conformation of your ligand. Right? So according to macromolecular perturbation theory, whenever a drug is approaching a receptor molecule, two types of conformational changes can occur: a specific conformational change and a non-specific conformational change. So whenever you get a specific conformational change, then we get a biological response. And a ligand that is able to cause a specific conformational change will be called an agonist. While a ligand that causes some non-specific conformational change, that will lead to no biological response. Right? You know that ligands which do not cause any biological response, they are called antagonists. Right? So ligands which do not cause, or ligands which cause some non-specific conformational change, they will be called antagonists. So this is the definition of agonist and antagonist according to macromolecular perturbation theory. The next concept or next theory is activation aggregation theory. According to this theory, the receptor is always in a state of dynamic equilibrium between the activated and inactivated form. So for convenience, the activated form is represented by RO and the inactivated form is represented by TO. Right? So the RO form, which is the activated form, it is associated with biological response, and the TO is associated with no biological response. Right? So there is an equilibrium with the biological response and no biological response. But when a ligand comes, that ligand can either bind with TO or it can either bind with RO. So depending on to which side the ligand binds, it will produce the response or it will not produce a response. So in agonist, what happens? The agonist binds with RO. So you know that RO is associated with biological response. So agonist shifts the equilibrium to RO side. It means the agonist will cause this receptor to move in this direction, and the result biological response will be produced, while the antagonist shifts the equilibrium towards TO side. The antagonists, since they do not produce any biological response, it means the antagonists are shifting the equilibrium towards the side of TO. And lastly, we have partial antagonists. The partial agonist binds with both the RO and TO. As a result, they will get some partial response. Right? So this is activation aggregation theory. So according to this theory, the receptor is in form of dynamic equilibrium between the activated form and the inactivated form, right? And depending on if your ligand is agonist or antagonist, the equilibrium will be shifted on the side of biological response or on the side of no biological response. So that depends on the nature of ligand which is approaching. The next theory is the two-stage receptor model. According to this receptor model, R is a receptor, and the receptor is in equilibrium with the activated form and inactivated form. Right? So this is resting state, which is inactive form. This is associated with no biological response, while this R prime is activated form, and it is associated with biological response. So when the drug is added to this system, right? So this equilibrium is maintained by equilibrium constant, which is L. Right? So when drug is added to this receptor, depending on, so if your drug is an agonist, if it's an agonist, it will bind with R star and will produce a biological response, right? So the KD for this will be KD star, and the drug receptor complex will be DR star, right? So star is indicating the receptor is activated form, so we'll get some biological response. If your drug is a partial agonist, in that case the drug will bind with R star as well as R. However, it will bind more with the R star. As a result, it will get some biological response, but that biological response will not be full because the because your partial agonist is not completely binding with R star. It's also binding with the inactive form of R, right? So you get some biological response, but the biological response will not be complete. If you have an inverse agonist, the inverse agonist will only bind with the inactive form of the receptor. As a result, we'll get the drug receptor complex, which is DR. So this is the inactive form of the drug receptor complex, and we'll get no response at all. But if a agonist is partial inverse agonist, then it will bind with R as well as R star, but it will preferentially bind with the inactive form of R. As a result, it will show some slight biological response, right? So this is the two-state receptor model theory. I hope you have understood this lecture well. So thanks all.